President Biden unveiled his budget proposal for the 2023 fiscal year on Monday. It's a $5.8 trillion package. It includes an increase in the military budget, about $31 billion. It also seeks more funding for police, education, public health, and other budget priorities. And to help pay for some of these new priorities, the president is proposing a 7% increase in the corporate tax rate, as well as a tax increase on what the White House describes as the very wealthiest Americans. Brian Deese is the White House director of the National Economic Council. It's good to see you, Brian. He joins me now to talk more about this. Brian, let's start with the taxes on the wealthy. I've seen varying reports on the small percentage of taxpayers to be affected by this. Let's set aside the percentages. Do you have any idea how many earners would actually be hit? And can you tell us why 20% is a good number as a minimum tax amount for those earning more than $100 million in wages and investment income?
Well, we'll start where you just left off. The share of U.S. households that make more than $100 million, have more than $100 million in wealth is 1/100%. So it's a very small share. And the reason to do this is because our tax system, when it comes to those very wealthiest Americans, is broken. The typical billionaire in America pays a tax rate of about 8%, and much of their income never is taxed and passes on generation to generation untaxed. So this is a proposal to say that those individuals should pay a minimum tax of 20% a year, and they can do that in a way that is not disruptive and does not discourage innovation, and in fact, make sure that we are allocating our tax proceeds in a way that's more efficient and we don't have capital locked up for years and decades without ever going taxed. So that's the basis of the proposal, and it's part of a overall budget that would reduce the deficit by historic amounts while investing in key priorities like education and healthcare.
Brian, briefly, how would you categorize those things that would be counted in annual income to push you over that threshold? What's included?
Well, you look at the net worth of an individual, and if it is over $100 million, then they would be subjected to a minimum tax regime. If they already pay more than 20%, they wouldn't be affected at all. But if they're one of those people where their taxes that they're paying are 8 or 5 or 0, they would have to pay a minimum of 20%. And just to put that in perspective, if you think about a typical family who's earning income on a W-2 and they're paying taxes, those families are often paying a tax rate of 20, 22, 24%. The reasonable approach here is to allow the wealthiest Americans to also be subjected to a tax rate in that range as well.
So it's not just income, it's investment income. Would it also include real estate?
So you look at the net worth, including liquid and illiquid assets, and then the 20% would be assessed on the gains that somebody has accrued. And there's a question about, well, how to assess on gains that are unrealized, for example, if your stock portfolio goes up. But to be very clear, when the stock portfolio goes up and you're worth several $billion, you have an economic gain. You can put that economic gain to work. Many people borrow against that gain to derive the benefits. And so this would say that you should pay a minimum amount against that gain on an annual basis and do so in a way that is stable, about 20% a year.
Understood. So national security is broadly defined in budget terms. You and I both know that. The rough national security number in this budget, as I read it, is $813 billion, $773 billion of that for the Pentagon. Now, by the calculations I saw in Politico this morning, that's a 1.5% real increase, meaning inflation adjusted. Is that enough? Does it make room for more aid to Ukraine or other possible hotspots elsewhere?
Well, a couple of things. First, this would be the largest nominal investment in national defense in our nation's history, and it is an increase over last year's level. Second, the importance is also what we're spending on, prioritizing new and emerging threats in areas where we need to build our capabilities, places like cyber defenses and space and other new security arenas. And third, we are right now working with Congress to fund the real and immediate security needs for the Ukrainian people in terms of military, logistics, and humanitarian assistance. We're working on that in real time. Likely that would go in addition to or separate from this budget request because we need to move on that immediately right now. What this budget underscores is that we're going to fund the national defense priorities. We're going to fund our security needs here and in the future, but we need to do so in a way that actually focuses on the things that are most necessary.
You used the magic word, Brian, immediate. There's also another immediate issue before Congress. The president talked about it today. I know you know that. $22.5 billion in COVID-related funding. The Senate Majority Leader said today negotiations continue. He remains optimistic. Where do you think the negotiations stand, and is the White House prepared to have this money approved even if there are congressional offsets required?
We're making progress, and we're working hard with members of Congress from both parties to find a path forward here. And we are hopeful and confident that we can do that. Look, this is really basic stuff. We have needs right now for tests, for vaccines, for the therapies that we know work. The progress that we've seen in vaccinating the country, bringing COVID cases down, making testing widely available, that is based on a system where we are able to fund these core needs. Nobody wants to be in a situation where we don't have the vaccines here in short order, or that people can't get the tests that they need. We've been there in the past. We never want to go there again. That's the practical funding needs ahead of us. We need to find common ground. We need to get a package here going. We're making progress in those negotiations, not there yet, but we're hopeful we'll get that done soon.
But a requirement for offsets is not a non-starter.
We're working to find a common sense path forward. And when it comes to offsets, as you know, and I know well, having been in many of these conversations and negotiations, finding agreement on offsets is often harder than it is on the investments. And that's not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's often where it come from, and can people live with that? So we're working pragmatically here to find a solution that will work.
Brian Deese, we thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Major.